A federal judge in Rhode Island said the Trump administration has violated his order to lift a sweeping freeze on federal spending and has ordered the government to restore the funds immediately. This is the first time in Trump's second term that a judge has accused the Trump administration to be disobeying a judicial mandate. The ruling comes in response to a lawsuit brought by 22 attorneys general in Democratic-led states after a wide-ranging OMB directive caused chaos and confusion across the country. The Trump administration said they will appeal the decision. Yesterday, the president took a swipe at the judicial branch, saying that there have been some very bad rulings and that it's a shame to see it. This comes amid overall concerns the Trump administration will not comply with court orders from judges who have ruled against the president's agenda. That's because of a social media post on Sunday from the vice president, J.D. Vance, who wrote in part, "Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power." Yesterday, Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville was asked whether the White House has a right to circumvent judges who are halting executive actions. The Trump ally said, quote, "I think they do." But here's how other Republican senators responded to that question.
Well, I mean, the courts obviously are the sort of the branch of our government that calls balls and strikes and referees, and I think that they've got an important role to play. And so I expect that to continue, and I expect the court to play the important role of ensuring that, that the laws in the country are followed.
When you have a lawsuit, somebody wins and somebody loses. But I support the process, and I support the legitimacy of the federal judiciary. If you disagree, and many people, I've disagreed with opinions before, that's why God made courts of appeal, and that's why God made the U.S. Supreme Court. But you're never going to hear me attack the legitimacy of the federal judiciary.
Well, I don't even think we have seen that yet, so it's a hypothetical.
J.D. Vance didn't say anything about anything that was not appropriate. He's saying on the appropriate use of executive powers. I think that's what he meant. I think it's a very, very clear line between the powers that are there that are appropriate. This president is saying, I believe I have the authority. You find out in a court of law, and if they are appropriate, you move forward with them.
And should follow whatever the court's decision ultimately is?
Well, we have to. We will follow the decisions of the court, and I don't think there's been anybody saying no.
Of course, and Willie, it's one of the things I said yesterday. It's like though it was meant to troll, and though J.D. Vance has said, and we heard it a couple of years ago on that podcast, that he thought you should just run over the third branch, like Andrew Jackson. The United States senators, I would say, other than maybe Tommy Tuberville and maybe a handful of others, overwhelming majority of senators are going to say what an overwhelming majority of members of Congress are going to say, which is you have to follow the court's decisions. And the fact that anybody would even suggest that you don't is, it's okay for us to say that's shocking that they missed, I guess, civics class starting in 4th or 5th grade, or maybe they didn't have it. Maybe that's the problem. But as Senator Rounds said, it is the courts we listen to, and they define what is legitimate. They define what is not legitimate. Sometimes the president likes it. Sometimes the president doesn't. And yesterday, we went through 4 years of federal rulings where the federal courts enjoined, stopped, or overturned what President Joe Biden did.
Yeah, and we saw just yesterday, we'll go through some of it, a flurry of court action of stopping some of these policies and these executive orders put in place by the Trump administration. And almost everyone we heard there is a lawyer, Joe, and we've talked about this. J.D. Vance went to Yale Law School. He was on the Yale Law Review. John Kennedy went to prestigious schools. They're all lawyers. They can't say anything other with a straight face, I hope, than we have 3 co-equal branches of government. If you don't like the way a court rules, we've got the Court of Appeals you can go to, and then you can go up to the Supreme Court if you think it ought to go that far. That's just the way the system works, and anything else ought to be noise. We'll see again how they hold up under pressure from Donald Trump. But for now, at least a handful of them there saying the right things. Let's bring in NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Savalos. Guys, good morning. Danny, start with you. What do you make of that back and forth there? J.D. Vance saying, well, we don't always have to listen to what the courts say, and some other senators pushing back on that idea or trying to interpret for J.D. Vance what they hope he meant by that. What did you hear?
Yeah, historically, this has happened before. I think J.D. Vance even referred to this situation way back. President Andrew Jackson refused to enforce an order by the Supreme Court that resolved a clash between the Cherokee Nation and the state of Georgia. And history's lesson is, well, not a whole lot happens to a president or an administration who refuses to follow an order, because we operate on this kind of trust that the president will do that. And while it's probably apocryphal that Jackson said he has his order, meaning the Supreme Court, let's see them enforce it, it's a scary quote, if true, because it's really an unspoken thing that the courts don't really have their own armies. They don't have a powerful arm to enforce their orders. They rely on the government working properly and not defying them. So it is a scary concept. Presidents may have that power. Maybe it's not so much that they have that power. It's just that no one can stop them from not following the courts.
Allie.
Ken, I do have a question for you, though, because although senators are talking about this as theoretical and hypothetical, even as some of them are saying they're uncomfortable or trying to explain away what the vice president and others have seemingly suggested, you are seeing this federal judge up in Rhode Island saying that the Trump administration is already balking at the court's order, not unfreezing the frozen spending and federal grant money. So push is seemingly already coming to shove here.
That's absolutely right, Allie. Taking us out of the realm of a theoretical discussion into the practical and the real. Here you have this federal judge in Rhode Island saying very explicitly that I believe you're violating my order that you stop this spending freeze and resume funding to places like the National Institutes of Health, because I think that's unconstitutional. And he began his ruling with a quote from a Supreme Court decision that essentially says those who defy federal court orders risk criminal contempt. Now, he didn't explicitly threaten the Trump administration with criminal contempt in the rest of the ruling, but that was certainly the implication of opening that way. And it raises a whole host of questions, which is how does a judge hold an administration in criminal contempt? I mean, you can't jail the president, obviously. In fact, if we remember, Donald Trump was held in criminal contempt by the New York judge in his criminal case, but that judge was very reluctant to mete out that ultimate sanction of jail time. It didn't happen when he was the ex-president. It's not going to happen when he's the president. So what are the remedies? I mean, we were gaming this out yesterday. Are they going to throw some hapless Justice Department lawyer who happens to be in the courtroom, throw that person in jail? Do they levy fines? What would be the point of fining the federal government, which has unlimited resources? So we're really at that point where it's starting to become a practical question, not just a theoretical question. And the other issue is it's really difficult for the judge to get the facts when you have a government agency and, the plaintiffs aren't allowed inside, and you have Elon Musk and his people and they're saying, well, we are spending the money, and folks are saying, well, we're not getting the money. So it's a really difficult situation, guys.
So it was good to hear some of the Republicans saying you're not going to hear us thwarting the law. But at the same time, Danny, if you look at the front page of the New York Times right now, it says basically we're in a constitutional crisis, even though there isn't a complete clear definition. Citing different deans of law schools from across the country and experts talking about being in this crisis because of the flurry of things that Trump has done, from birthright citizenship, freezing federal spending, shutting down agencies, removing leaders from agencies. The systematic, unconstitutional, and illegal acts create a constitutional crisis, one legal expert said. The distinctive feature of the current situation, several legal scholars said, is its chaotic flood of activity and collectively amounts to a radically new conception of presidential power. It is a constitutional crisis when the President of the United States doesn't care what the Constitution says, regardless whether Congress or the courts resist. Up until now, while presidents might engage in particular acts that were unconstitutional, there was never a sense that, the Constitution was meaningless. And the bottom line is the flurry and the chaos of it may make it so that the courts won't even have the time to react. To that, you say what?
I think we need to be careful with the term constitutional crisis, because as I define it, that would be a situation where the Constitution doesn't have an answer and there is a pressing conflict. The flurry of executive orders, the chaos, that I think doesn't get us to crisis yet. It is irritating for the courts. It is challenging. It could lead to a serious problem if, as you said, they become too congested with dealing with these orders.
They keep coming.
The crisis occurs, and we've already talked about it, at the moment when there is a court order and the president or the administration refuses to follow it. Because historically, we don't really have a clear answer for what to do in that situation. On the first half of it, issuing a bunch of executive orders, not only do we know that the courts can handle it, they already did this back in 2017. This is the same MO. The Trump administration then would just fire out executive orders. It felt like they weren't even spell checking them. And then they would let the courts prune them like the proverbial bonsai tree, or they would just withdraw them and go back to the drawing board. It's probably not the most efficient way of doing it. It's chaotic, as you said. It's problematic.
Yeah.
But constitutional crisis for me is the moment the court issues an order and the administration resists. You could say that the last notable occurrence was when Nixon initially refused to comply with a subpoena issued by the Supreme Court. Eventually, he capitulated. But history is full of these near crises examples. The question is, what do we do going forward?
And the funding freeze is just one case of the courts pushing back. We have a long list in front of us this morning. The buyout pause was extended by a federal judge. The birthright citizenship contesting that was blocked again. Funding of NIH that was cut by the administration, that's been blocked again by a judge. So you're seeing the courts stepping in here. We'll see what happens next.